We've had our disappointments in the past, hanging on for years hoping they'll pull through and then they don't. Nice thing about Ender, he's determined to ice within the first 6 months. Oh? Don't you see what's going on here? He's stuck at the giant's drink in the mines game. Is the boy suicidal? You never mentioned it. Everybody gets the giant sometime, but Ender won't leave it alone, like Pinal. Everybody looks like Pinal at one time or another, but he's the only one who killed himself. I don't think it had anything to do with the giant's drink. You're betting my life on that, and look what he's done with his launch group. Wasn't his fault, you know. I don't care. His fault or not, he's poisoning that group. They're supposed to bond, and right where he stands, there's a chasm a mile wide. I don't plan to leave him there very long anyway. Then you'd better plan again. That launch is sick, and he's the source of the disease. He stays till it's cured. I was once the source of the disease. I was isolating him, and it worked. Give him time with the group to see what he does with it. We don't have time. We don't have time to rush too fast with a kid who has as much chance of being a monster as a military genius. Is this in order? The recorder's on. It's always on. Your ass is covered. Go to hell. If it's in order, then it's in order. Hold him where he is until you see how he handles things in his launch group. Graf, you give me ulcers. You wouldn't have ulcers if you'd leave the school to me and take care of the fleet yourself. The fleet is looking for a battle commander. There's nothing to take care of until you get me that. They filed clumsily into the battle room like children in a swimming pool for the first time, clinging to the handholds along the side. Null gravity was frightening, disorienting. They soon found that things went better if they didn't use their feet at all. Worse, the suits were confining. It was harder to make precise movements since the suits bent just a bit slower, resisted a bit more than any clothing they had ever worn before. Ender gripped the handhold and flexed his knees. He noticed that along with the sluggishness, the suit had an amplifying effect on movement. It was hard to get them started, but the suit's legs kept moving, and strongly after his muscles had stopped. Give them a push this strong, and the suit pushes with twice the force. I'll be clumsy for a while. Better get started. So still grasping the handhold, he pushed off strongly with his feet. Instantly he flipped around, his feet flying over his head, and landed flat on his back against the wall. The rebound was stronger, it seemed, and his hands tore loose from the handhold. He flew across the battle room, tumbling over and over. For a sickening moment, he tried to retain his up-and-down orientation, his body attempting to right itself, searching for the gravity that wasn't there. Then he forced himself to change his view. He was hurtling toward a wall. That was down. And at once he had control of himself. He wasn't flying, he was falling. This was a dive. If he could choose how he would hit the surface. I'm going too fast to catch a hold and stay, but I can soften the impact. I can fly off at an angle, and if I roll when I hit and use my feet. It didn't work at all the way he had planned. He went off at an angle, but it was not the one he had predicted, nor did he have time to consider. He hit another wall, this time too soon to have prepared for it. But quite accidentally, he discovered a way to use his feet to control the rebound angle. Now he was soaring across the room again toward the other boys, who still clung to the wall. This time he had slowed enough to be able to grip a rung. He was at a crazy angle in relation to the other boys, but once again his orientation had changed, and as far as he could tell, they were all lying on the floor, not hanging on a wall, and he was no more upside down than they were. "What are you trying to do? Kill yourself?" asked Jen. "Try it," said Ender. "The suit keeps you from hurting yourself, and you can control your bouncing with your legs like this." He approximated the movement he had made. Then Shen shook his head. He wasn't trying any fool stunt like that. But one boy did take off. Not as fast as Ender had, because he didn't begin with a flip, but fast enough. Ender didn't even have to see his face to know that it was Bernard. And right after him, Bernard's best friend, Eli. Ender watched them cross the huge room, Bernard struggling to orient himself to the direction he thought of as the rebound from the wall. No wonder Bernard broke his arm in the shuttle, Ender thought. He tightens up when he's flying. He panics. Ender stored the information away for future reference. And another bit of information, too. Eli did not push off in the same direction as Bernard. He aimed for a corner of the room. Their paths diverged more and more as they flew, and where Bernard made a clumsy, crunching landing on the bounce of his wall, Eli did a glancing triple bounce on 3 surfaces near the corner that left him most of his speed and sent him flying off at a surprising angle. Eli shouted and whooped, and so did the boys watching. Some of them forgot they were weightless and let go of the wall to clap their hands. Now they were drifting lazily in many directions, waving their arms, trying to swim. Now that's a problem, thought Ender. What if you catch yourself drifting? There's no way to push off. He was tempted to set himself adrift and try to solve the problem by trial and error, but he could see the others, their useless efforts at control, and he couldn't think of what he would do that they weren't already doing. Holding onto the floor with one hand, he fiddled idly with the toy gun that was attached to his suit in front, just below the shoulder. Then he remembered that the hand rockets sometimes used by Marines when they did a boarding assault on an enemy station. He pulled the gun from his suit and examined it. He had pushed all the buttons back in the room, but the gun did nothing there. Maybe here in the battle room it would work. There were no instructions on it, no labels on the controls. The trigger was obvious. He had had toy guns, as all children had, almost since infancy. There were 2 buttons that his thumb could easily reach and several others along the bottom of the shaft that were almost inaccessible without using 2 hands. Obviously, the 2 buttons near his thumb were meant to be instantly usable. He aimed the gun at the floor and pulled back on the trigger. He felt the gun grow instantly warm. When he let go of the trigger, it cooled at once. Also, a tiny circle of light appeared on the floor where he was aiming. He thumbed the red button at the top of the gun and pulled the trigger again. Same thing. Then he pushed the white button. It gave a bright flash of light that illuminated a wide area, but not as intensely. The gun was quite cold when the button was pressed. The red button makes it like a laser, but it's not a laser, Dap had said, while the white button makes it a lamp. Neither will be much help when it comes to maneuvering, so everything depends on how you push off, the course you set when you start it. It means we're going to have to get very good at controlling our launches and rebounds, or we're all going to end up floating in the middle of nowhere. Ender looked around the room. A few of the boys were drifting close to walls now, flailing their arms to catch a handhold. Most were bumping into each other and laughing. Some were holding hands and going around in circles. Only a few, like Ender, were calmly holding on to the walls and watching. One of them, he saw, was Eli. He had ended up on another wall not too far from Ender. On impulse, Ender pushed off and moved quickly toward Eli. Once in the air, he wondered what he would say. Eli was Bernard's friend. What did Ender have to say to him? Still, there was no changing course now, so he watched straight ahead and practiced making tiny leg and hand movements to control which ways he was facing as he drifted. Too late, he realized that he had aimed too well. He was not going to land near Eli. He was going to hit him. "Here, snag my hand," Eli called. Ender held out his hand. Eli took the shock of impact and helped Ender make a fairly gentle landing against the wall. "That's good," Ender said. "We ought to practice that kind of thing." "That's what I thought, only everybody's turning to butter out there," Eli said. "What happens if we get out there together? We should be able to shove each other in opposite directions." "Yeah. Okay?" It was an admission that all might not be right between them. "Is it okay for us to do something together?" Ender's answer was to take Eli by the wrist and get ready to push off. "Ready?" said Eli. "Go!" Since they pushed off with different amounts of force, they began to circle each other. Ender made some small hand movements, then shifted a leg. They slowed. He did it again. They stopped orbiting. Now they were drifting evenly. "Packed head, Ender," Eli said. It was high praise. "Let's push off before we run into that bunch. And then let's meet over in that corner." Ender did not want this bridge into the enemy camp to fail. "Last one there saves farts in a milk bottle," Eli said. Then slowly, steadily, they maneuvered until they faced each other, spread-eagled, hand to hand, knee to knee. And then we just scrunch? Asked Eli. I've never done this before either, said Ender. They pushed off. It propelled them faster than they expected. Ender ran into a couple of boys and ended up on a wall that he hadn't expected. It took him a moment to reorient and find the corner where he and Eli were to meet. Eli was already headed toward it. Ender plotted a course that would include 2 rebounds to avoid the largest cluster of boys. When Ender reached the corner, Eli had hooked his arms through 2 adjacent handholds and was pretending to doze. You win. I want to see your fart collection, Eli said. I stored it in your locker, didn't you notice? I thought it was my socks. We don't wear socks anymore. Oh, yeah. A reminder that they were both far from home. It took some of the fun out of having mastered a bit of navigation. Ender took his pistol and demonstrated what he had learned about the 2 thumb buttons. And what does it do when you aim it at a person? Asked Eli. I don't know. Why don't we find out? Ender shook his head. We might hurt somebody. I meant, why don't we shoot each other in the foot or something? I'm not Bernard. I never tortured cats for fun. Oh. It can't be too dangerous or they wouldn't give these guns to kids. We're soldiers now. Shoot me in the foot. No, you shoot me. Let's shoot each other. They did. Immediately, Ender felt the leg of his suit grow stiff, immobilized at the knee and ankle joints. You frozen? Asked Eli. Stiff as a board. Let's freeze a few, Eli said. Let's have our first war, us against them. They grinned. Then Ender said, Better invite Bernard. Eli cocked an eyebrow. Oh? And Shen. That little butt wiggler? Ender decided that Eli was joking. If you didn't hold yours so tight, it would wiggle too. Eli grinned. Let's go get Bernard and Shen and freeze these bugger lovers. In 20 minutes, everyone in the room was frozen except Ender, Bernard, Shen, and Eli. The 4 of them sat there whooping and laughing until Dap came in. I see you've learned how to use your equipment, he said. Then he did something to a control he held in his hand. Everybody drifted slowly towards the wall that he was standing on. He went among the frozen boys, touching them and thawing their suits. There was a tumult of complaint that it wasn't fair how Bernard and Eli had shot them while they all weren't ready. Why weren't you ready? Asked Dap. You had your suits just as long as they did. You had just as many minutes flapping around like drunken ducks. Stop moaning and we'll begin. Ender noticed that it was assumed that Bernard and Eli were the leaders of the battle. Well, that was fine. Bernard knew that Ender and Eli had learned to use the guns together, and Ender and Eli were friends. Now others might believe that Ender had joined his group, but it wasn't so. Ender had joined a new group, Eli's group. Bernard had joined it too. It wasn't obvious to everyone. Bernard still blustered and sent his cronies on errands, but Eli now moved freely through the whole room, and when Bernard was crazy, Eli would joke a little and calm him down. When it came time to choose their launch leader, Eli was the almost unanimous choice. Bernard sulked for a few days, and then he was fine. And everyone settled into new patterns. The launch was no longer divided into Bernard's in-group and Ender's outcasts. Eli was the bridge. Ender sat on his bed,